I always tell myself that I don't mind the quiet. After all, it's better than the constant noise of the world outside, where everything's falling apart. The streets echo with sirens. The radio blares endless reports of another disaster, and the air smells of smoke and decay. But in my small apartment, in the silence of these four cracked walls, I find solace. It's not much, barely enough to keep the rent paid or the lights on, but it's home. And at the end of the day, that's all I have left. She's asleep now, my little girl, curled up on the threadbare couch that's seen better days. A faded blanket is draped over her tiny body, and her hair, dark and tangled, falls over her face. Her name is Lily. She's 6. And in some strange way, she's all that keeps me from drifting off into the void myself. I glance over at her, watching the rise and fall of her chest. I can't help but wonder what it would have been like if things had been different, if her mother hadn't left, if she hadn't disappeared without so much as a note. I didn't ask for much, just a little help, a little bit of partnership. But she was always different, always too quick to walk away when things got hard. And things had gotten hard the moment I lost my job. I don't even know where she went. One night she was there, and the next, just a breath of a goodbye on the wind. I think she thought I couldn't care for Lily, that I'd fail. Maybe she was right. It's been tough, trying to give Lily everything she deserves. But I'm doing the best I can. I stare at her for a while longer. She's safe. She's warm. She's still innocent. In this broken world, that's something. The smell of industrial cleaner lingers in my clothes no matter how much I scrub. It's like a badge of honor or shame, depending on how you look at it. Most nights I'm pushing a mop down long empty hallways. Corporate offices, hotels, even schools. Places that shine on the surface but feel hollow underneath, much like their occupants. I've cleaned up after the worst of humanity. Spilled coffee, shredded papers, vomit from drunk executives who couldn't hold their liquor. You see a lot as a janitor, and most of it isn't pretty. I'm invisible to them, just a shadow that moves through their spaces, erasing their messes like I was never there. It's hard work, soul-crushing even. The hours are long and the pay is barely enough to scrape by. Every step feels like a reminder of how far I've fallen, but it's honest work, and at least it puts food on the table. Some days, though, the weight of it all feels unbearable. Like tonight as I sit in the dim light of the kitchen, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee. My hands are rough, calloused from years of scrubbing and lifting. My back aches from hours of bending over, yet I keep going, for Lily, for her future. It's nearly midnight when the phone rings. The shrill sound cuts through the silence, jolting me from my thoughts. For a moment I just stare at it, the old corded handset vibrating slightly against the chipped countertop. Calls at this hour are never good news. With a sigh, I pick it up. Yeah? Jonathan, comes the gruff voice on the other end. It's my boss, Mr. Graves. He never calls unless he's got something urgent or inconvenient. Hey, Mr. Graves, what's up? I've got a job for you, he says, skipping the pleasantries. Big party at the end of the year, New Year's Eve. Some of the country's most powerful people will be there. They need extra staff to clean up after their mess. A party? I echo, frowning. What kind of party? The kind where you don't ask questions, he replies sharply. Look, it's good money. They'll feed you too. Hell, it's probably the cushiest gig you'll get all year. I hesitate, glancing back at Lily. She's still fast asleep, her little hands clutching the edge of the blanket. I don't know, I mutter. I promised Lily I'd spend New Year's with her. She's been looking forward to it for weeks. There's a pause on the other end of the line, then a heavy sigh. Listen, Jonathan, I get it. You're a family man, but this isn't just some run-of-the-mill job. These people pay well, better than anything you've seen. It could make a real difference for you and your kid. Think about that. I don't respond right away. My mind races, torn between the promise I made to Lily and the cold, hard reality of our situation, the bills piling up, the empty fridge, the second-hand clothes that barely fit her anymore. I'll think about it, I finally say, my voice low. You do that, Mr. Graves says, his tone softening just a fraction. But don't take too long. They need an answer soon. The line goes dead, and I'm left standing there, the weight of the decision pressing down on me like a lead blanket. I sit back down at the kitchen table, the coffee now cold and bitter on my tongue. My gaze drifts back to Lily, her small, fragile frame, her soft, rhythmic breathing. What kind of father am I, even considering breaking my promise to her? But what kind of father would I be if I didn't do everything in my power to give her a better life? I rest my head in my hands, the noise from outside creeping back into my awareness. Sirens wailing, the hum of distant traffic, the faint buzz of the old refrigerator. It feels like the world is closing in, the walls of my tiny apartment shrinking around me. What if this party is an opportunity, a chance to climb out of this hole I've been stuck in for years? But what if it's just another dead end, another reminder of how powerless I am? Lily stirs in her sleep, murmuring something unintelligible. I stand and walk over to her, gently brushing her hair away from her face. I'll make it right, I whisper. I promise. But even as I say the words, I'm not sure what they mean. I sit at the kitchen table, the dim light from the flickering bulb casting long shadows on the cracked walls. The decision weighs heavily on me, but in the end, there's no escaping reality. Lily needs more than what I can give her right now. That party might be my only chance to catch a break, even if it means breaking my promise. With a deep breath, I pick up the phone and dial Mr. Graves's number. It rings twice before his gruff voice answers. "Jonathan," he says, as if he's been expecting my call. "I'll do it," I say, the words heavy in my mouth. "I'll take the job." "Good," he replies, his tone brisk and businesslike. "Be at the Grand Tower by 6 p.m. sharp on New Year's Eve. Wear something decent. This isn't your usual gig." "Got it," I mutter, already dreading what lies ahead. Before I hang up, he adds, "And Jonathan, don't screw this up. These people don't tolerate mistakes." The line goes dead, and I'm left staring at the phone, the weight of my decision settling in. Lily's still curled up on the couch, her tiny frame rising and falling with each breath. I sit down beside her, gently shaking her awake. Her eyes flutter open, and she gives me a sleepy smile. "Daddy?" she murmurs, her voice soft and drowsy. "Hey, sweetheart," I say, forcing a smile. "Listen, I need to talk to you about something." She sits up, rubbing her eyes with her small fists. "What is it?" I have to work on New Year's Eve," I say carefully, watching her face for a reaction. Her smile fades, replaced by a look of confusion. "But you promised we'd celebrate together. You said we'd watch the fireworks." "I know, Lily, and I'm so sorry," I say, my chest tightening. "But this job, it's important. It'll help us a lot. I promise I'll make it up to you, okay?" She looks down at her hands, her little shoulders slumping. "Okay," she whispers, her voice barely audible. I pull her into a hug, holding her tightly. "I'll be back before you know it," I say, trying to sound reassuring. "And we'll have our own special celebration, just you and me." She nods against my chest, but the weight of her disappointment lingers in the air. After tucking Lily back under her blanket, I head to the phone again. There's only one person I trust to take care of her while I'm gone: my sister, Emily. It takes a few rings before she picks up, her voice warm and familiar.
"Hey, John, what's up?"
"Hey, Em," I say, running a hand through my hair. "I need a favor."
"Sure, anything."
She replies without hesitation. "I've got a job on New Year's Eve," I explain. "It's kind of a big deal." Can you stay with Lily for the night?
Of course. You know I love spending time with her. What's the job?
Just cleaning up at some fancy party, I say, trying to downplay it. But it's good money. There's a pause on the other end of the line before she says,
All right, I'll be there. Don't worry about Lily. She'll be in good hands.
Thanks, Em, I say, relief washing over me. I owe you one.
You owe me plenty.
She teases, and I can't help but chuckle. The grand tower looms above me like a gleaming monolith, its glass and steel exterior reflecting the city's dim lights. I've seen it from a distance before, but standing at its base, I feel like an ant staring up at a giant. As I step through the revolving doors, the sheer opulence of the place hits me like a tidal wave. The lobby is vast, with marble floors so polished I can see my reflection in them. Chandeliers hang from the high ceilings, their crystals catching the light and scattering it like tiny stars. A man in a crisp black suit greets me at the front desk, his expression cold and impassive. Name? He asks, his voice clipped. Jonathan Miller, I reply, trying not to fidget under his scrutiny. He consults a list, then nods. You're expected. Take the service elevator to the top floor. I thank him and make my way to the elevator, my heart pounding in my chest. As the doors slide shut and the elevator begins its ascent, I can't help but feel like I'm being lifted into another world, one that I don't belong to. When the doors open, I step into a room that takes my breath away. The ballroom is shrouded in an unsettling, almost ethereal darkness. The only light comes from an array of flickering candles placed in ornate golden holders scattered across the room. Their flames cast long, dancing shadows that make the space feel both grand and oppressive, like something out of a twisted fairy tale. The guests moving through this dimly lit haze are anything but ordinary. Each of them wears an intricately designed animal mask: golden lions, silver foxes, black ravens, and serpents studded with emeralds. Their clothes are equally strange, like costumes from a forgotten time: velvet cloaks, embroidered robes, and dark flowing garments that seem to absorb the flickering light. Something about the anonymity of their masks sends a chill down my spine. It feels as though I've stumbled into a secret ritual rather than a party. The soft hum of conversation has an almost surreal quality, muffled and distant beneath the sound of the orchestra. Every laugh, every whispered word seems to carry a hidden meaning, a coded message meant for ears far more attuned than mine. I keep to the edges of the room, my hands gripping the cleaning supplies as if they're a lifeline. None of this makes sense, but it's not my place to question it. I'm here to work, nothing more. Whatever strange world I've stepped into, it's not mine to understand. Still, I can't shake the growing sense of unease. It feels like the air itself is heavier, pressing down on me as if the room knows I don't belong. Yet I force myself to move, one careful step at a time, blending into the shadows. Just another invisible worker among the powerful and untouchable. But in the back of my mind, one thought keeps echoing. What kind of party is this? The candlelight was just enough to see every detail in the room I was assigned to clean. The floors were polished to a mirror-like shine, reflecting the dim, flickering light of the candles in their ornate golden holders. The chandeliers overhead, though grand, remained eerily unlit, their crystals catching only the faint glow from below. I could work under these conditions. It wasn't much different from the usual dim lighting in rundown offices or storage rooms, but it was the surrounding darkness that set me on edge. Beyond the ballroom, the hallways and adjoining rooms were shrouded in pitch black. The contrast was stark. Our staging area, where the cleaning staff and assistants gathered to prepare, was brightly lit with normal fluorescent lights. There, everything felt mundane, almost safe. I couldn't help but feel the stark division between the light and the dark, as though I was stepping between two worlds. It wasn't just me working this gig. There were plenty of us. Cooks, waiters, assistants, and a handful of other janitors. The staff room buzzed with activity as people hurried to get everything ready. Platters of exotic foods were arranged with precision, glasses polished to a perfect shine. I could hear the clatter of pots and pans from the kitchen, the hiss of steam escaping as chefs barked orders at their assistants. Despite the rush, there was an unspoken tension in the air. I noticed it in the way people moved, quieter than usual, avoiding eye contact. Even the waiters, who were usually chatty and full of banter, worked in silence. It was like everyone knew something I didn't, something they didn't want to speak about. I found myself exchanging a few brief glances with another janitor, an older man with a stooped back and a mop that looked like it had seen better days. He gave me a nod but said nothing, his eyes full of caution. We were in the middle of preparing the ballroom when one of the supervisors strode in, flanked by two guards in sleek black suits. He carried a large box, its edges scuffed from years of use, and set it down on a table with a thud. Without saying a word, he opened it and began pulling out masks, animal masks, each one meticulously crafted. They were beautiful, yet deeply unsettling. The level of detail in their design was uncanny, almost lifelike, as if each mask carried the essence of the creature it represented. "Put them on," the supervisor ordered, his voice sharp. I hesitated, holding the mask I'd been handed. The hollow eyes and smooth finish sent a chill through me, but the weight of the guard's gaze kept me silent. "Why do we need these?" I asked, my voice breaking the heavy silence. The supervisor shot me a cold glare but didn't answer. One of the guards stepped forward, his presence alone enough to silence any further questions. "If you refuse to wear it, you can leave now," the guard said flatly. His tone was final, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his cap. I glanced around. The other staff were already putting on their masks, their faces disappearing behind the elaborate designs. My hands trembled slightly as I raised the mask and slipped it over my face. The interior was cool and padded, fitting snugly against my skin. My breath echoed softly inside, creating a hollow, rhythmic sound. The world outside the mask seemed different, darker, quieter, as though I'd crossed a threshold into another realm. "Good," the supervisor said, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Now, back to work." The ballroom was now alive with flickering candlelight, each flame casting long, dancing shadows across the walls and ceiling. The room's elegance was undeniable, yet under the animal masks, everything felt surreal. I moved between the banquet tables, ensuring each centerpiece was perfectly aligned, each glass polished to a crystal-clear shine. Around me, the other staff worked in silence, their masks reflecting the golden glow of the room. I couldn't tell who was who anymore. Everyone had become a faceless figure, just another shadow in this opulent setting. Strange music drifted through the air, soft at first, then building to a hypnotic rhythm. It wasn't like anything I'd heard before, a blend of classical strings and eerie, otherworldly tones that seemed to seep into my bones. It was unsettling, yet mesmerizing, as though the music itself was a part of the evening's ritual. The guests were already here, mingling in the dim light. Their animal masks were even more elaborate than ours, adorned with jewels, feathers, and gold filigree. They moved through the room with an air of superiority, their laughter and conversation blending with the strange music. Some sipped champagne from crystal flutes. Others gestured animatedly, their voices low but commanding. I caught glimpses of figures entering through the grand double doors, each one more extravagant than the last. A man in a Black Panther mask strode confidently to the center of the room, his dark suit tailored to perfection. A woman in an intricately designed hawk mask glided past, her gown trailing like liquid silver. As I continued my work, the reality of the situation began to sink in. This wasn't just a party. The masks, the music, the secrecy, it all felt like the prelude to something much larger, something hidden beneath the surface of this extravagant facade. I passed by a group of guests, their animal masks glinting in the candlelight as they laughed and whispered among themselves. They didn't acknowledge me, didn't even glance in my direction. To them, I wasn't a person. I was a ghost, a mere shadow in their grand celebration. I paused for a moment, adjusting the placement of a towering floral arrangement. From this vantage point, I could see the entire room, the guests, the staff, the guards standing like statues near the exits. Everything seemed perfectly orchestrated, as though we were all pieces on a chessboard, moving according to some unseen hand. I took a step back, my fingers brushing against the edge of the table as I surveyed the room. The mask felt heavier now, the material pressing against my skin like a second layer. The strange music continued to play, its haunting melody resonating deep within me. A part of me wanted to rip the mask off, to walk out the doors and never look back. But then I thought of Lily, of the money I needed to give her a better life. I couldn't afford to walk away, not now, not when I was already in so deep. The supervisor passed by, his sharp eyes scanning the room. He stopped briefly in front of me, his gaze lingering as though he could sense my hesitation. "Everything needs to be perfect," he said quietly, his tone carrying an unspoken warning. I nodded, forcing myself to focus. Whatever unease I felt, I had to push it aside. This was just another job, I told myself. Another long night that would eventually end. As the evening wore on, the guests began to take their seats at the long banquet tables. The strange music softened, replaced by the gentle clinking of glasses and the murmur of conversation. The atmosphere shifted, becoming almost ceremonial. The golden lion mask seated at the head of the table raised his glass, and the room fell silent. "To the beginning of a new era," he declared, his voice deep and commanding. The guests raised their glasses in unison, their movements precise, almost rehearsed. I stood at the edge of the room, my hands gripping the cleaning supplies as I watched. The words, the masks, the music, it all felt like the prelude to something far greater than a simple celebration. And deep down, I knew that by the end of this night, nothing would be the same. I was wiping down the edge of a long banquet table, the candlelight flickering as if struggling against the weight of the dimly lit room, when someone came up beside me. She moved quietly, her presence almost ghost-like in the eerie glow. I turned, startled, and found myself face to face with another staff member, a waitress wearing one of the same unsettling animal masks as the rest of us.
"Hey,"
she said softly, her voice muffled but still warm through the mask.
"Figured I wasn't the only one thinking all of this is weird."
I glanced around to make sure no one was listening before replying. Weird doesn't even begin to describe it. "What's your name?"
"Anna."
she said, leaning slightly closer.
"And you?"
"Jonathan," I replied, hesitating for a moment. "So, you've done this kind of thing before?" She chuckled, shaking her head.
"No way. I usually work smaller gigs, weddings, banquets, that sort of thing. But when I heard how much this one pays, well, I couldn't say no."
"Yes, I'm here," I admitted. "Single dad, got a daughter at home, so I take what I can get."
"That's sweet,"
she said, her tone softening.
"How old is she?"
6, I said, a faint smile tugging at my lips under the mask. "Her name's Lily. She's the reason I'm here tonight." Anna nodded, her hands fiddling with a tray of empty glasses.
"It's always about the money, isn't it? I guess for these people it's just another night of excess. For us, it's survival."
I glanced toward the guests, their extravagant animal masks glittering under the candlelight as they moved about the room, with an air of untouchable superiority. Do you think they even notice us?
No, but that's how it's always been. They don't care who we are, as long as their champagne stays full and the tables stay spotless.
The conversation flowed easily as Anna and I moved through the ballroom, attending to our duties while stealing moments to talk. She told me about her younger brother, who was studying to become a chef, and how she worked these gigs to help pay for his tuition.
Sometimes I wonder if it's worth it.
She said, adjusting her mask.
All this effort, just to scrape by while these people throw money around like it's nothing.
I nodded, understanding her frustration all too well. It's the same everywhere, isn't it? The gap just keeps getting bigger. Time seemed to pass faster with someone to talk to, and before long, the murmur of conversation among the guests began to shift. The music had slowed, taking on an almost hypnotic rhythm, and the mood in the room grew heavier. Anna nudged me gently. "It's almost midnight," she said, gesturing toward the grand clock hanging above the entrance. The guests gathered near the center of the ballroom, their masked faces turned toward the clock as the final minutes of the year ticked away. Their voices grew louder, merging into a unified chant as they counted down the seconds. 10, 9, 8. The sound of their voices filled the room, echoing off the high ceilings. My pulse quickened as I glanced around, noting how the staff had retreated to the edges of the room, silent and still, as if waiting for something. 7, 6, 5. From my position near the wall, I spotted him, the man in the lion mask. He stood taller than the others, his golden mane glinting in the dim light. Beside him was someone wearing one of our masks, their hand firmly clasped in his. 4, 3. The lion mask man raised his free hand high, a commanding presence among the sea of masked faces. 2, 1. At the stroke of midnight, an eerie silence enveloped the ballroom. The distant chime of the clock echoed softly, but it was quickly drowned by a low, resonant sound. It began as a hum, deep and ancient, vibrating through the air like the distant call of a forgotten trumpet. The sound grew, not louder but heavier, denser, as if the very fabric of reality was straining under its weight. It wasn't just a noise, it was a presence pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The candles around the room flickered wildly, their flames swaying in rhythm with the sound, as if caught in some unseen storm. The music from the orchestra melded with the unholy tone, creating a twisted symphony that clawed at my sanity. It was a harmony from hell, a song meant to summon something far beyond human understanding. As the sound intensified, a sharp, searing pain shot through my head. I clutched my ears, but it did little to muffle the unbearable weight of the tone. Around me, the other staff members did the same, their screams blending with the cacophony. Blood began to seep through my fingers, warm and sticky, as the relentless vibration seemed to tear through my eardrums. The pain was excruciating, but the worst part was realizing that the guests were unaffected. They stood motionless, their masked faces turned toward the man in the lion mask, their calm composure a stark contrast to our agony. But in that moment, none of it mattered. The only thing that existed was the sound, a primal, earth-shaking blast that seemed to reverberate from the dawn of time itself. The candles danced furiously now, their light casting wild, chaotic shadows across the room. The flames seemed alive, bending and twisting with the sound as if they, too, were part of the unholy orchestra. The music swelled, each note a knife slicing through the air, each beat a hammer pounding against my skull. It wasn't music meant for human ears. It was a hymn for something far darker, something ancient and monstrous. Through the haze of pain and noise, I glimpsed Anna, her hands pressed tightly against her head, her body trembling. I wanted to reach for her, to say something, but the sound drowned out everything. It was all-consuming. a force of nature that demanded submission. Suddenly, the world outside seemed to vanish. The large glass windows that once revealed the glittering city skyline now showed only blackness. Every light beyond the ballroom was extinguished, plunging the city into total darkness. Inside, the flickering candles were the only source of illumination, their golden glow casting eerie patterns across the masked faces of the guests. It felt as though we were suspended in time, trapped in a void where only the sound and the light of the candles existed. The man in the lion mask lowered his hand slowly, as if conducting the final note of the terrible symphony. The sound faded, leaving behind an oppressive silence, the kind that crushes any attempt at thought or reason. I stood there, my ears ringing, my hands still slick with blood. My heart pounded violently as the weight of what had just happened settled over me like a suffocating shroud. This wasn't just a party. This was the unveiling of something ancient, something far beyond the realm of human comprehension. And as I looked into the flickering flames, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had been summoned wasn't done with us yet. The sound stopped as suddenly as it had begun, cutting off mid-blast and leaving the room in an oppressive silence. My ears rang from the aftermath, and the blood trickling down my neck felt cold against my skin. The air was thick with tension, the hum of the trumpet still vibrating faintly in my bones, though now only a ghost of its former force. The man in the lion mask stood at the center of the ballroom, unmoving, his hand still raised. The flickering candlelight glinted off the golden mask, casting eerie shadows across its feral features. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered his arm, and a sharp metallic glint caught my eye. He had pulled a knife from within his robe. The blade was long and cruel, its surface reflecting the dim light like a shard of liquid silver. Every movement he made was deliberate, calculated, and somehow ritualistic. The room seemed to hold its breath as he turned toward the figure beside him, a staff member wearing one of the plain animal masks, their body trembling with fear. The lion masked man raised the knife high above his head, his voice deep and commanding as he spoke.
Be the light that guides us all. May the Lord accept our sacrifices.
The trembling staff member shook their head in silent terror, but the lion masked man's grip was unyielding. With one swift motion, he grabbed the back of their neck, forcing them forward. The blade gleamed as it descended, slicing cleanly across the staff member's throat. Blood sprayed in a crimson arc, splattering the floor and the lion mask's golden mane. The staff member's body convulsed, their hands clawing at their neck as they crumpled to the ground. The lion masked man didn't flinch. He crouched beside the lifeless body, pulling a crystal glass from the folds of his robe. Holding it beneath the gushing wound, he let the glass fill with dark, thick blood. Once full, he rose, lifting the glass high above his head like a trophy. His voice rang out again, a triumphant roar.
May the Lord accept our sacrifices.
Without hesitation, he pressed the glass to his lips, tilting it back as he drank deeply. The blood dripped from the edges of the mask, staining the pristine white collar of his robe. The room erupted into chaos. Screams filled the air as the other staff members, myself included, stood frozen in shock. Anna was beside me, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of the table for support.
What the hell is this?
She whispered, her voice breaking. But before I could answer, the other masked guests began to move. Like predators stalking their prey, they turned toward us, their steps slow and deliberate. One by one, they grabbed the nearest staff members. A woman in a tiger mask lunged at a waiter, dragging him to the ground as he thrashed and screamed. A man in a serpent mask coiled his arms around a cook, forcing him still as another guest brought down a blade. The sound of knives slicing through flesh was sickening. Blood pooled on the polished floor, the thick metallic scent filling the air. The screams of my fellow staff echoed through the room, blending with the distorted music that had begun to play again, a haunting melody that seemed to mock our terror. I watched in horror as the scene unfolded before me. The guests' masks now appeared even more menacing under the flickering candlelight. They weren't just random designs, they were predators. Lions, tigers, wolves, and serpents. Their movements were graceful yet savage, like animals on the hunt. It was then that I realized the truth. Our masks, those of the staff, represented weak, prey-like animals. Birds, deer, rabbits. We were never meant to be part of the celebration. We were the sacrifices. Anna grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin.
Jonathan, we need to get out of here.
She cried, her voice barely audible over the cacophony of screams and cries for help. But there was no way out. The guards stood by the doors, their faces impassive, their hands resting on their weapons. They weren't here to protect us. They were here to ensure the slaughter continued uninterrupted. One of the guests, wearing a leopard mask, grabbed a young assistant and dragged him to the center of the room. The assistant struggled, his screams piercing, but it was no use. The leopard mask guest lifted him high before slamming him onto the altar-like table at the room's center. The man with the lion mask stepped forward, his blood-stained knife gleaming as he raised it once more. With a guttural growl, he plunged the blade into the assistant's chest, cutting through flesh and bone as though it were nothing. The assistant's screams choked out, replaced by the wet, sickening gurgle of blood filling his lungs. The lion mask man reached into the wound, pulling out the assistant's still beating heart and holding it aloft. The room erupted in cheers from the guests, their voices wild and guttural. The blood from the heart dripped down his arm, staining his pristine robes. He placed the heart on the altar, stepping back as another guest stepped forward, their knife already drawn. My breath came in short, panicked gasps as I scanned the room, desperate for a way out. Anna clung to me, her grip tight and unrelenting.
We can't stay here. They'll kill us too.
She sobbed, her voice barely audible over the chaos. I nodded, forcing myself to think through the haze of terror clouding my mind. The only exit was blocked by the guards, but there had to be another way. My eyes darted to the far end of the room, where a heavy curtain concealed a small doorway. "Over there," I whispered, pointing. "It's our only chance." We moved slowly, keeping low and sticking to the shadows. Around us, the carnage continued, the sounds of blades tearing through flesh and the cries of the dying filling the air. My stomach churned as I stepped over the lifeless body of a waiter, his mask shattered, his blood pooling beneath him. Just as we reached the curtain, a figure loomed in front of us. A guest in a wolf mask, his blade dripping with fresh blood. His hollow eyes met mine through the mask, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. "Run!" I shouted, shoving Anna toward the curtain. The wolf mask man lunged at me with a knife, his movements swift and feral. I barely managed to sidestep, grabbing a metal candlestick from a nearby table. The heavy object felt like a lifeline in my trembling hands as he came at me again, the blade gleaming in the flickering candlelight. With a desperate swing, I brought the candlestick down hard on his wrist. He howled in pain, dropping the knife, but didn't stop. He lunged again, his masked face inches from mine. I slammed the candlestick into his chest, sending him staggering back. His breath came in ragged gasps, but I couldn't give him a chance to recover. With every ounce of strength I had, I swung the candlestick one last time, striking him square in the side of the head. He crumpled to the floor, motionless. The metallic tang of blood filled the air as I stood over him, panting, my heart hammering in my chest.
Jonathan!
Anna's panicked voice snapped me out of my daze. She grabbed my arm, her grip tight.
We need to go now.
Without a word, I grabbed his blade, took her hand, and bolted toward the nearest exit. We burst through the doorway and found ourselves in a vast, pitch-black hall. The air was damp and cold, and every sound, our ragged breaths, our hurried footsteps, echoed endlessly. The only light was from the faint glow of the ballroom behind us, quickly swallowed by the oppressive darkness as the door swung shut. I tightened my grip on Anna's hand. "Stay close," I whispered. We can't let them find us. Anna fumbled in her pocket, pulling out a small lighter. The tiny flame flickered to life, casting a faint glow around us.
We can't see anything without light.
She whispered, her voice trembling. No, I hissed, snapping the lighter shut. They'll see us too. The darkness was absolute, disorienting. Every step felt like walking into a void, each sound amplified in the stillness. I could feel Anna's fear through her trembling hand, but we had no choice. We had to keep moving. We slowed our pace, our footsteps careful, each one a calculated risk against the unknown terrain ahead. I squeezed Anna's hand lightly to reassure her, though I felt far from calm myself.
What the hell is going on, Jonathan?
She whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't know, I admitted, my voice strained. But this isn't just some party. It's a ritual, a sacrifice. And we were the offering. Her grip tightened.
Why us?
I don't know, I muttered, piecing it together as I spoke. But I think they chose us because we're weak. Look at our masks, birds, deer. We were never meant to leave that room alive. Anna's breath hitched, and I could hear her trying to suppress a sob.
And the guests?
Predators, I said grimly. Lions, tigers, wolves. They see themselves as hunters, superior. This whole thing, it's some kind of twisted power play, a pact with something dark. She fell silent for a moment, her breathing shallow. Then, her voice broke the silence again, barely more than a whisper.
Do you think we'll make it out?
I didn't answer right away. The truth was, I didn't know, but I couldn't let her lose hope. Not now, not while we still had a chance. We will, I said firmly, but we need to stay quiet, stay hidden. If we can find another way out, we'll be okay. The hall stretched endlessly, the cold air pressing against us like a physical force. Every now and then we'd pause, straining to hear any sign of pursuit. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint sound of dripping water somewhere in the distance. My mind raced, replaying the horrors we'd just witnessed. The screams, the blood, the lifeless bodies of my fellow staff. It was all too much, but I forced myself to focus. We couldn't afford to dwell on the past. Survival was all that mattered now. Anna's voice broke the silence again, her tone filled with quiet desperation.
What if there's no way out?
There has to be, I said, though the words felt hollow. They brought us here. There's always an exit.
But what if they're guarding it?
She asked, her voice trembling. Then we'll find another way, I said, gripping her hand tighter. We'll figure it out, Anna. We have to. The darkness played tricks on my senses. Every creak, every distant drip of water felt like footsteps, like someone, or something, was closing in on us. My heart raced with every sound, my body tense and ready to fight or flee at a moment's notice.
We're going in circles,
Anna whispered, her voice breaking the suffocating silence. No, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure. Just keep moving forward. We'll find something. A door, a window, anything. The faint sound of voices echoed behind us, distant but unmistakable. My blood ran cold as I realized the predators were on the hunt again.
They're coming,
Anna said, her voice barely audible. Then we keep moving, I said, pulling her forward. We don't stop until we're out of here. Just as the voices grew closer, a faint light appeared ahead of us, a soft, flickering glow that seemed to beckon us forward. I couldn't tell what it was, but it was the first sign of hope in this endless void. Anna hesitated.
What if it's a trap?
It might be, I said, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at me. But it's better than waiting for them to find us. With that, we pressed on, the light growing brighter with every step. The sound of pursuit faded into the distance, replaced by the rhythmic pounding of my own heartbeat. Whatever lay ahead, we had no choice but to face it. The heavy darkness seemed to press in on us as we stumbled into the next hall, the faint flicker of candlelight the only sign of life ahead. My grip on the stolen blade tightened, and Anna's hand felt clammy in mine, but I refused to let go. As we approached the light, the muffled sounds of hurried whispers and soft sobs became clearer. Rounding the corner, we found a group of kitchen staff huddled together, their faces pale and tear-streaked beneath their masks. Each of them clutched a candle, the flickering flames casting wild shadows on the walls. They turned toward us, their eyes wide with terror. Some recoiled, thinking we might be more of the guests, but recognition soon replaced their fear. Your staff too," one of them stammered, his voice trembling. "Yes," I said, trying to steady my breathing. "We're trying to get out of here. Did you see what happened back there?" One of the women nodded, her hand gripping a large kitchen knife so tightly her knuckles were white.
"We saw everything. The blood, the screams. They dragged them like animals to slaughter."
Her voice broke, and she clutched the edge of the countertop for support. The kitchen was in shambles, with overturned pots and shattered plates scattered across the floor. It was clear they had been preparing food when the chaos erupted and had fled in a panic. "We tried to hide," another man said, his voice rough, as if he'd been screaming. "But they found some of the others and..." His words trailed off, his trembling hands holding a meat cleaver close to his chest. Anna stepped forward, her voice urgent but soft.
Does anyone know a way out? We can't stay here. They'll come looking for us.
The group exchanged uneasy glances until one of them, an older man with streaks of gray in his hair, spoke up. "I know where the exit is," he said. "It's through the service tunnels. They lead outside, but we have to go now before they block the way." The kitchen staff, though terrified, had armed themselves with whatever they could find: knives, rolling pins, meat cleavers. It wasn't much, but in the face of the horrors we'd just witnessed, it felt like a lifeline. "We'll stick together," I said, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. "We move fast and quiet. No matter what happens, we don't stop." The older man nodded. "Follow me." He led the way, his candle trembling as he walked, the faint light illuminating a narrow door at the far end of the kitchen. Behind it, the service tunnels stretched out into the darkness, cold air wafting from their depths. The tunnels were damp and claustrophobic, the flickering candles casting eerie, distorted shadows on the walls. The sound of our hurried footsteps echoed around us, each step a reminder of how vulnerable we were. Anna stayed close to me, her free hand clutching a small paring knife she had taken from the kitchen. The others followed in tense silence, their eyes darting nervously toward every shadow, every faint sound. "We're close," the older man whispered, his voice barely audible over the drip of water somewhere in the distance. "Just a little further." We reached a small alcove where the group paused to catch their breath. The older man set his candle on a ledge, his face drawn and weary. "We'll be safe once we're out," he said, more to himself than anyone else. I crouched beside Anna, my hand still gripping the blade. "You okay?" I asked softly. She nodded, though her eyes betrayed her fear.
I just want to get out of here, Jonathan. I can't take this anymore.
"None of us can," I said, glancing back at the group. "But we have to keep moving. We're almost there." The air in the tunnel grew colder as we pressed forward, our candles flickering weakly against the encroaching darkness. Every sound seemed amplified: the rustle of clothing, the scuff of shoes on damp stone, each one sending a fresh wave of tension through the group. Suddenly, the older man at the front halted, raising a hand to signal silence. "What is it?" I whispered, the words barely escaping my lips. He pointed ahead where the faint outline of a large, rusted door loomed in the distance. Its edges glistened faintly in the candlelight. "That's the exit," he said, his voice tight with relief. A surge of hope pushed us forward, but just as we moved, a chilling sound echoed from behind, a low, guttural growl that froze me in my tracks.
They're coming,
Anna whispered, clutching my arm so tightly I could feel her nails digging into my skin. The growls grew louder, joined by the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, and closing in fast. My pulse quickened as I turned to the group. "Put out the candles," I hissed. "What?" one of the staff whispered back, their voice shaky. "We won't see anything." "They'll see us if we don't," I said firmly, already pinching the wick of my own candle. One by one, the flames went out, plunging us into near-total darkness. The tunnel felt even colder now, the absence of light amplifying every sound around us. I reached for Anna's hand and whispered, "Stay close. Follow the wall if you have to, but don't lose me." The older man whispered from the front, "The door's just ahead. Quiet now." With painstaking slowness, we crept toward the exit, guided only by touch and memory. My breathing was shallow, every inhale bringing the faint metallic scent of damp stone and old blood. Finally, my outstretched hand met the cold, rough surface of the rusted door. I felt for the handle and turned it as quietly as possible. The door creaked open, and we stepped through into what felt like an enormous open space. A faint draft whispered through the hall, chilling the sweat on my skin. The sound of dripping water echoed somewhere in the distance, but beyond that, the silence was absolute. Anna squeezed my hand.
Where are we?
She whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know," I murmured, scanning the darkness. "Just stay together." We took a few tentative steps forward when suddenly, faint, rhythmic taps echoed through the hall. My heart stopped as I realized it wasn't the sound of dripping water. It was footsteps. Then, one by one, torches along the walls flared to life, their flames revealing a scene that made my blood run cold. They were waiting for us. The guests stood in a semicircle at the far end of the hall, their predator masks gleaming in the torchlight. The lion, the tiger, the wolf, and more, all of them poised, their weapons glinting in their hands. My grip tightened on the blade I'd taken, but my heart felt like it was about to burst from my chest. Beside me, Anna let out a soft gasp, her body trembling. The man in the lion mask stepped forward, his blood-stained robes swaying as he raised his knife. His voice rang out, deep and resonant, filling the cavernous space.
"You thought you could escape the hunt?"
The flames of the torches flickered wildly, casting eerie, shifting shadows on the cold stone walls. The man in the lion mask stood at the forefront of the semicircle, his blood-stained blade still glinting in the firelight. His golden mask shimmered, its lifelike mane giving him an almost regal yet menacing presence.
"No one escapes the hunt."
His deep, commanding voice echoed through the hall, reverberating off the walls.
"You thought you could hide in the darkness? But darkness is where we thrive. Let us be the light that reveals your purpose, your sacrifice."
My heart pounded in my chest, but I held his gaze through the hollow eyes of my mask. "What purpose?" I shot back, my voice steadier than I expected. "You're nothing but murderers, hiding behind rituals and lies." He tilted his head slightly, as if amused by my defiance.
"Murderers?"
He echoed, his tone almost mocking.
"No, you know nothing. But soon the truth will be revealed. May the Lord accept our sacrifices."
I tightened my grip on the blade in my hand, my knuckles white. "You'll have to take those sacrifices by force. We're not going down without a fight." The lion mask man chuckled, low and guttural.
"Ah, the spirit of defiance, how fitting, but it won't save you."
He raised his blade high, his voice booming as he called out to the others.
"Let the hunt begin."
The moment the words left his mouth, the guests surged forward like a pack of wild animals, their movements swift and predatory. Blades glinted in their hands and their eyes burned with the thrill of the hunt. "Fight!" I shouted, my voice tearing through the chaos. "Fight until the last drop of blood." The first predator to reach us was the man in the wolf mask, his blade slashing through the air. I sidestepped his attack and drove my stolen knife into his side, feeling the resistance as it pierced flesh. He let out a guttural cry and staggered back, but another figure, this one wearing a serpent mask, lunged toward me before I could catch my breath. The serpent's blade narrowly missed my throat as I ducked, my heart hammering in my chest. I countered with a wild swing of my own, the knife slicing across his arm. Blood sprayed, dark and warm, staining the cold stone floor beneath us. Behind me, Anna fought fiercely, her small paring knife clutched tightly in her trembling hand. She slashed wildly at a guest in a raven mask, her eyes wide with terror but filled with determination. The raven mask figure stumbled back, clutching a deep wound on his forearm, but another guest quickly replaced him, their blade aimed straight for her. "Anna, duck!" I shouted. She dropped to the ground just as I hurled the wolf mask's knife over her head, the blade embedding itself in the chest of her attacker. The man fell back with a sickening thud, his weapon clattering to the floor. The hall descended into pure chaos, the sounds of metal clashing, flesh tearing, and screams echoing in every direction. Blood pooled on the ground, making the floor slick and treacherous. One of the kitchen staff, a young man clutching a meat cleaver, charged at the lion masked man with a desperate cry. But the lion was faster, sidestepping the attack with a grace that belied his size. In one swift motion, he plunged his blade into the young man's stomach and twisted. "No!" I shouted as the young man crumpled to the ground, his cleaver slipping from his lifeless hand. The older man who had led us through the tunnels swung a heavy rolling pin at a guest in a jaguar mask, cracking it against their skull with a sickening crunch. The jaguar mask figure fell, but the victory was short-lived, as another guest drove a blade deep into the older man's back. He fell to his knees, blood pooling beneath him as he gasped his final breaths.
We can't keep this up.
Anna screamed, her voice hoarse as she blocked another attack. "We have no choice," I yelled back, slashing at the legs of a tiger mask figure who had lunged at me. The blade cut deep, and they fell with a roar of pain, but another guest immediately took their place. The kitchen staff fought valiantly, their makeshift weapons no match for the finely crafted blades of the predators. One by one they fell, their cries of pain and terror echoing in my ears. Blood splattered my face as I drove my knife into the chest of another attacker, their body convulsing before crumpling to the floor. My arms ached, my breaths coming in ragged gasps, but I refused to give up. The lion masked man moved through the carnage like a force of nature, unstoppable and merciless, his blade cutting down one staff member after another with brutal precision. His movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic. With each swing of his blade, he spoke in a low, reverent tone as though in prayer.
Be the light.
His voice carried a chilling weight, each word punctuating the horror unfolding around him. Blood splattered across his golden mask, but he remained calm, unwavering, as if every sacrifice was a necessary step toward some dark, unspoken purpose.
Do you see now?
He bellowed, his voice carrying through the hall.
Resistance is futile. You were born to serve this purpose.
"You're wrong," I shouted, my voice raw with anger and desperation. "We're more than your sacrifices." I charged at him, my blade raised, but he parried my attack with ease, his strength overwhelming. He struck me hard across the face with the hilt of his knife, sending me sprawling to the ground.
You have spirit.
He said, standing over me, his blade poised to strike.
But spirit alone will not save you.
Before he could bring the blade down, Anna screamed and lunged at him, her knife flashing in the dim torchlight. She drove the blade into his shoulder, the force knocking him off balance. He staggered back, letting out a deep, guttural growl, his golden mask glinting with fresh blood.
Jonathan, now!
Anna shouted, her voice trembling but fierce. Without hesitation, I gripped my blade tightly and thrust it upward into his arm, the steel slicing through flesh and muscle. He roared in pain, his body jerking violently, but he didn't fall. Instead, he pulled back, ripping the blade from his arm as blood seeped through the thick fabric of his robe. The hall descended into chaos. The remaining predators surged forward, their weapons gleaming as they cut down staff members left and right. It was a massacre. The screams of my fellow workers echoed off the stone walls. blending with the wet, sickening sound of blades tearing through flesh. Anna and I fought desperately, slashing and stabbing at anything that came too close. Blood soaked the floor, making it slick and treacherous, and the metallic stench of it filled the air, choking me. One by one, the others fell, their bodies crumpling to the ground in pools of dark red. The kitchen staff, who had armed themselves with cleavers and knives, fought valiantly, but were no match for the sheer ferocity of the predators. "Keep moving," I shouted to Anna, my voice hoarse from the exertion. "We have to get out of here." We dodged and weaved through the carnage, the world around us a blur of blood, steel, and death. Anna and I finally reached the far end of the hall, where a side passage led into the darkness. Behind us, the slaughter continued unabated. We didn't look back. There was no time to grieve, no time to process the nightmare we were leaving behind. The sounds of battle faded as we fled deeper into the passage, our breathing labored, our bodies battered and trembling.
We need to find a way out of here now.
Anna gasped, her voice breaking. I didn't reply. I couldn't. The weight of what we had just witnessed, the lives lost, was too much to bear. Just as we reached a moment of reprieve, a voice echoed from the hall behind us, deep, resonant, and full of conviction.
This will end soon.
The lion-masked man declared, his tone unwavering despite his injuries.
The light will return with your blood. Believe in me.
His words sent a chill down my spine, their ominous weight pressing against my chest like a physical force. The air in the passage was cold and damp, and the oppressive silence was broken only by the distant echoes of our footsteps. Anna clung to my side, her breathing ragged as we pressed deeper into the dark, twisting corridor.
What just happened back there?
Anna asked, her voice trembling but tinged with frustration.
How did they find us so quickly?
I didn't answer immediately. My mind was racing, replaying every horrifying detail of the massacre in the hall. The lion mask man's chilling words echoed in my head. The light will return with your blood. Believe in me. It doesn't make sense, I muttered, more to myself than to her. We extinguished the candles. We were careful.
Maybe they didn't need light. Maybe they could see us, even in the dark.
Her words sent a chill down my spine. I thought back to the way the predators had moved, their attacks precise, their eyes seeming to follow us even in near-total darkness. We rounded a corner and froze as faint shuffling sounds reached us from further down the passage. My grip on the blade tightened, and I pulled Anna behind me. "Who's there?" I called, my voice low but firm. A flicker of light appeared, and I realized it was the faint glow of a candle. The figure holding it stepped closer, revealing a familiar face. One of the kitchen staff behind him, two more survivors emerged, their faces pale and eyes wide with fear. "Jonathan?" the first man said, his voice shaky. "Is that you?" I nodded, lowering my blade slightly. "You made it out." "Just barely," he murmured, his hands trembling as he gripped the candle's fragile glow. During the fight, we hid when it became clear we were losing. When the screams faded into an eerie silence, we seized our chance and ran, searching desperately for a way out. But it seems they're everywhere, closing in on us. All of us gathered in a small alcove, huddling close as the dim candlelight flickered against the damp stone walls. The survivors clutched their makeshift weapons, a butcher's knife, a broken chair leg, holding onto them as if they were lifelines.
They always find us.
One of the women said, her voice breaking.
No matter how far we run, no matter how well we hide, they always know where we are.
Anna glanced at me, her expression grim. She said, her voice steady but laced with urgency.
It's the masks. They're masks.
"What do you mean?" one of the survivors asked, his eyes narrowing. Anna explained, her voice gaining strength.
Think about it. They've always been one step ahead of us, even in total darkness. It's like they can see us, sense us somehow.
My stomach churned as I realized she was right. The masks weren't just for show. They were tools, giving the predators an edge in this twisted hunt. "So what do we do?" the first man asked, his voice tinged with desperation. "How do we stop them?" I stood, the weight of everything we'd endured pressing down on me. The blood on my hands felt like it would never wash away, and the faces of the fallen haunted me with every breath. "There's no way out," I said, my voice low but resolute. The others looked at me, their faces a mixture of confusion and dread.
What are you saying?
Anna asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I met her gaze, my jaw tightening. This isn't just about survival anymore. We can't keep running, hiding, waiting for them to find us and slaughter us like animals. I paused, my voice hardening. It's either us or them. The room fell silent, the weight of my words sinking in. We will not be the prey anymore, I continued, my voice filled with quiet fury. We'll become the predators. Anna's eyes widened, her fear giving way to a flicker of determination.
You mean fight back?
I nodded. We'll take their masks, their weapons. We'll use their own strength against them. If they want a hunt, we'll give them one. The survivors exchanged uneasy glances, their fear slowly being replaced by something else, a spark of hope, a glimmer of defiance. How do we start? The first man asked, his grip tightening on his blood-stained knife. We start by making the darkness our ally, I said, my voice cold and resolute. We take the masks, then we strike when they least expect it. We'll make them fear us. Another man hesitated before speaking. But how do we get them? I met his gaze, unflinching. We go back to where the fight began. We take the masks from the fallen. Beside me, Anna stood tall, her determination unwavering.
No more running?
She said, her voice steady and sharp as a blade.
No more hiding?
The air in the passage was suffocating, thick with the metallic stench of blood and damp stone. We moved cautiously, each step measured, our breaths shallow. The faint flicker of torchlight ahead signaled that we were nearing the hall where the massacre had taken place.
Are you sure about this?
Anna whispered, her voice trembling. I nodded grimly. We need those masks. If we're going to survive, we have to fight them on their level. The survivors exchanged uneasy glances, but followed me as I led the way. The sight that greeted us when we entered the hall made my stomach churn. The bodies of the fallen staff lay scattered across the blood-soaked floor, their lifeless forms a grim reminder of what we were up against. Over there, I said, pointing toward the corpses of the predators we had managed to kill in the chaos. We approached cautiously, our footsteps squelching on the slick, bloodied floor. The first body belonged to the guest in the tiger mask, their weapons still clutched in their hand. I knelt and removed the mask, the heavy material cold and damp with sweat and blood. As I held it, I noticed intricate carvings on the inside, symbols and lines that seemed to hum with a faint energy. I hesitated for a moment, then slipped the mask over my face. The effect was immediate. The darkness around me melted away, replaced by sharp, clear detail. I could see everything, the fine cracks in the stone walls, the flicker of distant torchlight, even the faint tremor in Anna's hands as she held her knife. It works, I said, my voice muffled but filled with awe. I can see everything. Anna and the others quickly followed suit, retrieving masks from the other fallen predators. One by one, they slipped them on, their expressions shifting from fear to determination as they realized the mask's power. We can use this, I said, my voice steady now. They think they're the hunters, but we'll show them what it means to be prey. How? One of the survivors asked, clutching a blood-stained butcher's knife. We'll hunt them one by one, I replied. Use the tunnels to our advantage. Lure them out, isolate them, and take them down. Anna nodded, her confidence growing. We know the layout better than they do. If we stick to the shadows, we can catch them off guard. They won't expect us to fight back, I added, gripping my blade tightly. "That's our edge." Our first target was a guest in a wolf mask, one of the most brutal during the massacre. We knew he would patrol the passages searching for survivors. Anna volunteered to be the bait. Her role was to lead him into a narrow tunnel where the rest of us would be waiting in ambush. She moved silently through the darkened passage, her footsteps light and deliberate. The wolf mask figure appeared moments later, his blade gleaming faintly in the torchlight. He moved with predatory precision, his eyes scanning the darkness. Anna emerged through the tunnel, her figure silhouetted against the dim light. The wolf-masked man snapped his head toward her, his body tensing before he sprinted after her with predatory precision. She didn't falter, leading him deeper into the narrow passage, her steps quick yet deliberate. His pace quickened, the gap between them shrinking. But just as he lunged forward, she slipped into the ambush point, vanishing like a shadow into the trap. We struck swiftly. The wolf-masked man barely had time to react before we descended on him, blades flashing in the dim light. He fought fiercely, his strength formidable, but the combined force of our group overwhelmed him. I delivered the final blow, driving my blade into his chest. He let out a strangled gasp before collapsing, his body falling limp. The thrill of the hunt. We stood over the fallen predator, our breaths heavy but triumphant. Removing his mask, I slipped it into my pack and turned to the others. "One down," I said. "Let's keep going." The taste of victory fueled our resolve. We moved quickly, using the tunnels to track our next target. Our second target was a guest in a hawk mask. Unlike the wolf, he was more cautious, his movements deliberate as he stalked through the tunnels. We split into pairs, using the dark passages to close in on him from multiple directions. Anna and I moved silently, our masks allowing us to see clearly even in the pitch black. The hawk mask figure stopped abruptly, sensing something. He turned, his blade ready, but it was too late. One of the survivors lunged from the shadows, striking his arm and forcing him back. The fight was brutal, the confined space making every movement feel desperate and raw. I saw an opening and drove my blade toward his side, but he twisted at the last moment, the blade glancing off his ribs. Anna moved in, her knife aimed for his throat. He deflected her strike, but I used the distraction to slash his leg, bringing him to his knees. Together, we overpowered him, the final blow coming from one of the survivors, who drove a cleaver into his back. With the hawk mask man down, we took a moment to regroup. The masks, now stained with the blood of their original owners, felt like symbols of our growing strength.
"We're doing it. We're turning the tables."
Anna said, her voice filled with a mix of relief and determination. I nodded, wiping the blood from my blade. "We'll take them all down, one by one." As we moved deeper into the tunnels, the faint sound of footsteps and distant voices reached us. Then, the lion mask man's voice echoed through the darkness, chilling and resolute.
You can run, you can hide, but the light will always find you. Your defiance is meaningless. The hunt will end with your blood.
I clenched my fists, his words fueling the fire inside me. "Let him come," I said, my voice steady. "We're not running anymore." The tunnels echoed with the sound of our swift, coordinated strikes. The predators, once untouchable in their dominion, were now falling one by one. Every kill felt like reclaiming a sliver of the humanity they sought to strip from us. We cornered a guest in a jaguar mask near a narrow passage, our blades flashing as we brought him down. His death was quick, the mask slipping from his face as his blood pooled on the cold stone floor. Another, wearing a bear mask, met his end in the central chamber, where we trapped him between two paths. His strength was formidable, but together we overpowered him, our strikes landing in unison until he fell. Each victory emboldened us, but we knew we couldn't afford to celebrate. We moved silently, systematically, our senses sharp and our resolve unshaken. It wasn't until we brought down a guest in a serpent mask that I noticed something strange. Beneath the mask, hidden among the intricate carvings, was a tiny symbol glowing faintly. "Anna," I whispered, holding the mask up for her to see. "Look at this." Her brow furrowed as she inspected the symbol.
What is it?
"I think it's a tracker," I said, my stomach sinking. "They're tracking us," I said, my voice sharp and urgent. "They know where we are." Anna stared at me, her face pale behind the mask.
How?
She asked, her voice trembling. I ripped off my mask, turning it over in my hands. Beneath the carved symbols, a faint glowing mark pulsed like a heartbeat. "This," I said, holding it up for everyone to see. Anna's eyes widened in realization.
The masks. They're not just tools for them to see in the dark, they're trackers.
The weight of the revelation hit us all at once. The masks, which had given us an edge in the hunt, had also become our downfall. Before we could discard the masks, the sound of heavy footsteps reverberated through the passage. The faint glow of torchlight danced on the damp walls, growing brighter with each second.
They're here.
Anna said, her voice barely audible. Out of the shadows stepped the man in the lion mask, his golden visage gleaming in the flickering light. Behind him, the other predators emerged, their masks reflecting the faint glow. They spread out, surrounding us, their blades at the ready. The lion mask man's voice broke the tense silence, calm but laced with authority.
Did you think I wouldn't notice? When my hunters began to vanish, one by one, I knew you had turned the hunt. But only a fool would think they could wield the tools of the predator without being seen.
He gestured toward the masks in our hands.
You've used them well,
He continued, his voice echoing through the chamber.
but you should have known they would betray you. You thought you could turn the hunt, but the light always prevails.
The predators attacked without hesitation. The narrow space erupted into chaos as blades clashed, screams echoed, and blood splattered across the cold, damp walls. We fought with everything we had, but their numbers and precision overwhelmed us. Anna stayed close, her movement swift as she parried and struck, her knife finding its mark again and again. But for every predator we brought down, another seemed to take their place. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood, and the ground grew slippery beneath our feet. "We can't hold them off," one of the survivors shouted, his voice breaking with fear. "We have to," I yelled back, slashing at a guest in a raven mask who had cornered me. Anna cried out as she was thrown against the wall, her knife skittering across the floor. I lunged toward her attacker, driving my blade into his side before pulling her to her feet. The battle slowed as the lion mask man stepped forward, his presence commanding, his golden mask splattered with blood. He raised a hand, and the predators fell back, their heavy breaths the only sound in the room.
You have fought well. You've proven yourselves worthy adversaries, but you misunderstand your role in this world.
His gaze swept over us, and though his face was hidden, I could feel the weight of his judgment.
You seek to overturn the balance, to escape your fate, but the light must return, and it will, whether by your blood or ours. The pact endures.
He raised his blade high, his voice reverent and unwavering.
May we be the light by all of our blood if it is needed. The darkness will yield, and the light will be restored.
His voice resonated through the chamber, cold and commanding, each word slicing through the oppressive silence. The flickering torchlight danced on the edge of his blade, casting shadows that seemed to crawl along the walls. We stood there, battered and bloodied, our breaths ragged, the weight of his proclamation pressing down like a suffocating shroud. Then, with a deliberate motion, he lowered his blade, his eyes burning with cruel certainty as he delivered his chilling ultimatum.
This is your final chance. Surrender or die.
The oppressive silence of the tunnels gave way to a haunting familiarity as we were led back into the grand hall where the nightmare began. The air was thick with the metallic tang of blood, the flickering candles casting long shadows on the walls. The once pristine floors were now slick with crimson, the remnants of the massacre surrounding us like specters. The predators stood in a solemn line, their masks glinting faintly in the candlelight. At their center, the man in the lion mask commanded attention. He raised his hand, signaling for silence, though none of us dared to speak.
You wanted answers. It is time you learned the truth,
he said, his voice deep and resonant, reverberating through the cavernous space. With deliberate slowness, the man in the lion mask reached up and removed it. Gasps echoed from the survivors as his face was revealed. A man whose identity was impossible to ignore. His chiseled features, sharp gaze, and commanding presence were unmistakable. You, I whispered, my voice barely audible. He was Ian Miles, one of the world's most powerful billionaires, a name that carried weight in every corner of the globe. His influence spanned industries, governments, and even the whispers of the underground. The other predators followed his lead, removing their masks one by one. Familiar faces emerged, politicians, corporate giants, and media moguls. These were the people who shaped the world, now standing before us as orchestrators of this horrific ritual.
You're all monsters.
Anna spat, her voice trembling with a mixture of fury and disbelief.
No, we are merely servants of a higher purpose,
Ian said calmly. He took a step forward, his blood-soaked robes swaying as he spoke.
I will tell you a story. A few years ago, I was like you, blind, lost, consumed by the material world. I lived as if nothing could touch me, as if God himself was a myth. Then I met someone, a man known as the Seer.
His eyes darkened, the weight of his words settling over us like a heavy fog.
The Seer spoke of the end times, of the 7 trumpets that would herald the apocalypse. He told me when it would begin and what signs to look for. I dismissed him as a madman, but then the first trumpet sounded.
He paused, letting the gravity of his statement sink in.
The first trumpet sounded, and no one understood its meaning, except me. In that moment, I knew the Seer's words were true. The world was changing, unraveling right before my eyes.
He paused, his breath heavy with the weight of destiny.
Then the Seer spoke of the 4th trumpet, and this time I was ready to fulfill my purpose. We have arrived at the 4th trumpet.
His words sent a shiver down my spine. I thought back to the unearthly hum at midnight, the sound that pierced the fabric of reality itself.
The 4th angel sounded his trumpet, and a third of the sun was struck, a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, so that a third of them turned dark. A third of the day was without light, and also a third of the night.
The room seemed to grow colder as he continued.
The cosmic disturbance you felt, the hum, the darkness spreading across the sky, that was the 4th trumpet. It heralded a time of judgment, of chaos and despair.
He stopped pacing and turned to face us directly, his eyes burning with conviction. The Seer told me of this day, of the darkness that would descend upon the world, and he told me how to restore the light. The room was deathly silent as he continued.
The only way to reveal the light is through sacrifice. Each of us was chosen for this purpose. 99 souls, including mine. We offer ourselves willingly to appease the divine and bring the light back to this broken world.
The weight of his words hung heavy in the air, the truth of their purpose finally laid bare. He raised his arms as if addressing an unseen force.
The light will return when the darkness has been fed. We will sacrifice ourselves one by one, spilling our blood until the Lord accepts our offering and restores balance.
Anna stepped forward, her fists clenched.
You think killing yourselves and others will save the world? You're insane.
Ian met her gaze, his expression calm but unyielding.
It is not insanity. It is faith. We are the chosen, the ones who must bear this burden. You may not understand, but soon you will see.
He turned back to his followers, his voice rising in a solemn proclamation.
The darkness is our trial, our burden to bear, but we will endure. May we be the light by all of our blood if it is needed. The pact will endure, and the balance will be restored.
He turned to us once more, his expression softening but his resolve unshaken.
You can fight, you can run, but the darkness will find you. There is no escape from the divine will. This is divine judgment. It should be midday, yet the light has fled, leaving us in this abyss.
He turned back to face us, his piercing gaze cutting through the flickering shadows.
Believe me when I tell you, there is no escape from our purpose. We were chosen for this.
Anna gripped my arm tightly, her breathing uneven.
He's insane.
She whispered, her voice trembling, but Ian pressed on, unperturbed.
You may think me mad,
He said, as if reading her thoughts.
but what I offer now is fairness, balance. No more praise, no more predators, no more running or hiding.
He stepped forward, the candlelight dancing across the golden mask in his hand.
We will fight. Each of us will take up arms, fair weapons, equal footing, and we will fight to the death.
A murmur spread through the remaining survivors and his masked followers. Ian raised his voice, silencing the unrest.
May the Lord accept our sacrifices. We will fight until the last of us stands. Only then will the chosen one walk free and the light return to the world.
Ian's voice grew solemn as he continued.
We do this for our Lord, for our beloved ones, for humanity itself. Just as Jesus sacrificed himself to save us, so too shall we offer our lives.
My heart pounded as I processed his words. This wasn't just a ritual. It was a declaration of a holy war, where every life would be weighed on the scales of divine will.
I will not force you to fight.
Ian said, his eyes scanning the room.
But know this, the darkness will claim all who refuse. Only through blood will the light return.
He turned and clapped his hands. From the shadows, his followers emerged, carrying a collection of weapons, blades, axes, spears, all gleaming in the flickering candlelight. They laid them in a line at the center of the hall, a grim offering to the combatants.
Choose your weapon. The battle begins now.
I glanced at Anna, her face pale but resolute. We don't have a choice, I said softly. She nodded, her jaw tightening.
We fight.
One by one, we stepped forward, each of us selecting a weapon. I chose a sword, its hilt cold and heavy in my grip. Anna took a dagger, her fingers trembling as she wrapped them around the handle. Ian picked up a large, curved blade, its edge gleaming like a sliver of moonlight.
This is the only way. May the Lord guide our hands.
The grand hall had become an arena, a vast expanse of blood-slicked stone illuminated by the erratic glow of flickering candles. The air was thick with the stench of sweat, blood, and fear, mingled with the metallic tang of steel. Weapons glinted in the dim light, and the ground beneath our feet was slick with crimson. There were no masks now, no symbols of rank or identity, just raw, brutal combat. Each fighter was stripped bare of pretense, reduced to the most primal instinct, survival. Ian's voice boomed, commanding attention.
2 by 2.
He declared, his blood-stained blade resting heavily in his hand.
No mercy, no surrender. The last one standing will carry the light out of this darkness.
The combatants paired off, their faces pale but resolute. The first pair stepped into the center, a burly man with a heavy axe and a wiry woman wielding a twin set of curved daggers. The woman moved first, her blades a blur as she darted toward the man. He swung his axe in a wide arc, the force of it enough to send a gust of wind rushing past me. She ducked under the blow and slashed at his legs, her blades carving deep, jagged wounds. The man roared in pain, his blood spraying across the floor as he staggered. He swung wildly, his axe meeting only empty air as she danced around him, her strikes precise and merciless. With a final, brutal slice, she severed the tendons in his leg, sending him crashing to the ground. Before he could recover, she drove both blades into his chest, twisting them as blood bubbled from his lips. The room fell silent as she pulled her daggers free, the man's lifeless body crumpling to the floor. The next pair stepped forward, 2 men, their faces grim and determined. One held a longsword, its weight almost too much for his slender frame, while the other gripped a gleaming double-bladed axe, his muscles taut with controlled strength. The clash of steel was immediate and deafening, the sound echoing off the blood-stained walls. The man with the longsword swung wildly, the blade slicing through the air with reckless desperation. His opponent, the axe wielder, moved with calculated precision, deflecting the strikes with practiced ease. The axeman sidestepped a clumsy overhead swing, driving the flat of his weapon into the swordsman's ribs. The impact sent the younger man sprawling to the ground, gasping for air as blood dripped from his mouth. The swordsman struggled to his feet, his grip on the blade unsteady but resolute. With a guttural roar, he charged, the tip of his sword aimed at his opponent's chest. The axe-wielder met him head-on, catching the blade on the shaft of his weapon and twisting it violently, sending the sword clattering to the floor. Unarmed, the swordsman lunged forward, grabbing his opponent's arm in a desperate attempt to wrest control of the axe. They grappled fiercely, their bodies locked in a brutal struggle, blood and sweat mingling as they fought for dominance. With a sudden burst of strength, the axe-wielder broke free, spinning the weapon in his hands with deadly grace. He swung in a wide arc, the twin blades cutting through the air with a sharp hiss. The swordsman barely had time to react. The axe caught him at the base of the neck, slicing clean through flesh and bone. His head separated from his body in a spray of crimson, tumbling to the floor with a sickening thud. For a moment, the body stood, blood spurting from the gaping wound, before collapsing in a lifeless heap. The hall fell silent, the grotesque tableau illuminated by the flickering candlelight. The axe-wielder stood over his fallen opponent, his weapon dripping with blood. He raised the axe high above his head, his breath coming in ragged gasps, as if claiming his grim victory for all to see. My turn came sooner than I expected. I stepped forward, gripping my sword tightly, my knuckles white against the hilt. Across from me stood a towering man with a massive war hammer, his eyes cold and unyielding. Ian's voice cut through the chaos.
Begin.
The man charged, swinging the hammer with terrifying speed. I barely managed to dodge, the wind of its passage ruffling my hair. He swung again, and this time I parried, the force of the impact jolting my entire body. I lunged forward, aiming for his side, but he twisted away, the hammer coming down in a crushing blow that cracked the stone floor where I'd just stood. Our fight was a brutal dance of strength and precision, each of us landing glancing blows that drew blood but didn't slow the other. My arms burned, my breath came in ragged gasps, but I refused to falter. Finally, I saw an opening. As he raised the hammer for another strike, I ducked under his guard and drove my sword into his gut. He let out a strangled cry, his grip loosening on the hammer as he staggered back. I twisted the blade and yanked it free, his blood spraying across my face as he collapsed. Anna was next. She faced a lithe, snake-like woman, armed with a pair of short swords. The woman moved like water, her strikes quick and relentless. But Anna matched her, her dagger a blur as she parried and countered. The fight was fast and vicious, their blades clashing in rapid succession. Anna feinted left, drawing her opponent into a misstep before driving her dagger deep into the woman's side. The woman gasped, her swords clattering to the floor as Anna pulled the blade free and struck again, this time slitting her throat. The woman collapsed, her blood pooling around her as Anna stood over her, trembling but unyielding. The survivors dwindled with each passing fight, their numbers reduced to a handful. Every step we took was treacherous, the floor slick with blood and littered with the bodies of the fallen. The battles grew more desperate, each combatant fighting with the ferocity of someone who knew this was their last chance to live. One man, wielding a spiked mace, shattered his opponent's ribs with a single devastating blow, the sound of bone breaking audible even over the chaos. Another, using only a dagger, slit his adversary's Achilles tendon, bringing him to his knees before plunging the blade into his heart. By the time the final pair stepped forward, the hall was an abattoir, the flickering candlelight reflecting off pools of blood. The survivors were battered and broken, their weapons slick with gore, their faces pale and haunted. Ian watched from the edge of the carnage, his expression impassive. "This is the price of salvation," he said, his voice calm amid the chaos. The tension in the hall was suffocating, the oppressive silence broken only by the faint crackle of the flickering candles. Ian Miles stood in the center of the room, his bloodied blade hanging loosely in his hand. He surveyed the survivors, his cold eyes lingering on each of us.
This ends now. No more pretense, no more games. We will fight in 2 groups and only one group will remain for the next step.
A ripple of unease passed through the room.
The rules are simple. Each group will fight to the death. If one group is eliminated entirely, the remaining group will kill the last standing survivor of the other. Only then will the light return.
He pointed his blade at me, then at Anna.
I will fight with you,
He said, a faint smirk playing on his lips.
Let's see how far your defiance will carry you.
The survivors were divided into 2 groups of 5. My group consisted of Anna, myself, Ian, and 2 other survivors. Mark, a stocky man wielding a spiked club, and Clara, a sharp-eyed woman clutching a long spear. The opposing group, led by a fierce woman named Evelyn, stood ready. They were armed with a variety of weapons, axes, swords, and knives, each of them looking just as bloodied and exhausted as we were. Ian stepped forward, raising his blade high.
May the Lord accept our sacrifices.
He intoned solemnly. The 2 groups collided like a tidal wave of steel and fury. The clash of weapons echoed through the hall, mingling with the cries of pain and rage. Mark roared as he swung his spiked club, smashing it into the shield of a man wielding a short sword. The force of the blow sent his opponent stumbling back, but before Mark could follow up, Evelyn lunged at him with her axe, the blade cutting deep into his thigh. Blood sprayed across the stone floor as Mark let out a guttural scream. Clara darted in, her spear thrusting forward like a viper. She aimed for Evelyn's chest, but another fighter intercepted her, deflecting the spear with a jagged blade. They circled each other, weapons clashing in a deadly rhythm. Ian was a force of nature, his blade moving with terrifying precision. He parried an incoming strike from a man wielding twin knives, then spun and slashed, his blade carving a deep gash across the man's torso. Blood poured from the wound as the man fell to his knees, his weapons clattering to the floor. Anna fought fiercely beside me, her dagger flashing as she blocked and countered. She drove her blade into the neck of a woman who had lunged at her with a rusty sword, the sickening crunch of bone and sinew filling the air. The woman's body crumpled, her blood pooling around Anna's feet. I locked eyes with Evelyn, who charged at me with her axe raised high. I barely managed to deflect the blow, the force of it jarring my arms. I countered with a swift slash, my blade cutting into her shoulder, but she snarled and pressed forward, her strikes relentless. The hall became a chaotic battlefield, the floor slick with blood and littered with the bodies of the fallen. Each clash of steel was more brutal than the last, each scream more harrowing. Clara's spear found its mark, piercing through the throat of her opponent. The man gurgled, his hands clawing at the shaft as he collapsed, his life draining away. Mark, despite his injury, swung his club wildly, caving in the skull of one of Evelyn's fighters. The sickening crunch echoed through the hall as the body fell lifelessly to the floor. Ian moved with lethal grace, cutting down anyone who dared approach him. His blade was a blur, slicing through flesh and bone with horrifying ease. He fought with a cold, calculated efficiency, his expression never wavering. Despite our efforts, the opposing group fought ferociously. Evelyn, bloodied but unyielding, rallied her remaining fighters. They pressed forward, their attacks growing more desperate and vicious. The hall was soaked in blood, its once grand elegance now reduced to a battlefield of carnage. Clara and Mark fought valiantly, but the relentless onslaught of Evelyn's group was too much. Clara, her spear coated in blood, faced off against 2 fighters. Her strikes were swift and precise, but her exhaustion betrayed her. One of her opponents deflected her thrust and drove a blade deep into her side. Clara let out a sharp cry, staggering back as blood poured from the wound. She didn't fall. Gritting her teeth, she made one final lunge, impaling her spear through her attacker's chest. But the second fighter was ready, and with a brutal slash, he severed her throat. Clara dropped to her knees. her lifeless eyes staring ahead as her body crumpled to the floor. Mark roared in fury, swinging his spiked club with reckless abandon. He crushed one opponent's skull, the sound of bone shattering, reverberating through the hall. But his rage made him careless. Evelyn, bleeding but determined, ducked under his swing and buried her axe into his stomach. Mark gasped, dropping his weapon as blood spilled from the gaping wound. "You'll pay for this," he growled, even as his strength faded. Evelyn yanked the axe free and swung again, this time severing his head from his body. Mark's head rolled across the floor, coming to rest near Clara's lifeless form. Now only Anna, Ian, and I remained. Evelyn fell soon after, her body crumpling beneath Ian's blade. Her group was gone, their blood soaking into the cold stone. Ian stood over the bodies, his breathing steady despite the carnage. He turned to face us, his expression unreadable, his blade still dripping with the blood of our fallen comrades.
"This is it,"
He said, his voice calm but resolute.
"Still one last test."
Anna and I exchanged a glance, our faces pale and streaked with blood. "What do you mean?" I asked, my grip tightening on my sword. Ian stepped forward, his gaze unwavering.
"We fight each other, all three of us. May God accept our sacrifices and restore the light."
The hall fell into an oppressive silence, the weight of his words pressing down on us like a suffocating shroud. The flickering candlelight cast eerie shadows on the walls, illuminating the bloodied weapons and broken bodies that littered the floor. Ian raised his blade, his eyes fixed on me.
"This is the final test,"
He said again, his voice a chilling echo.
"No more alliances, no more escape. Only one will leave this hall alive."
The hall was silent, save for the soft flicker of candle flames casting jagged shadows across the blood-soaked floor. The oppressive weight of death hung in the air as the three of us, Ian, Anna, and I, stood motionless, weapons clutched tightly in our hands. Ian's piercing gaze moved between us, his expression calm yet menacing. His blade dripped with the blood of countless sacrifices, a reflection of the carnage that had led us to this moment.
"Only one will leave,"
He said, his voice low and steady, yet filled with an almost divine conviction.
"The light will return through sacrifice. May the Lord guide the blade of the chosen."
All the weapons of the fallen lay scattered around the hall, blades, axes, hammers, and spears, each one coated in the dark stain of blood. Ian stood motionless, waiting for us to make our move. I glanced at Anna, and she met my eyes, her face pale but resolute. In that instant, we understood each other. Together, we would fight him. Alone, we didn't stand a chance. Ian's lips curled into a faint smirk, as if he had anticipated our silent pact.
"You think unity will save you?"
He said, gripping his blade tightly.
"But you've only prolonged your suffering."
Ian lunged first, his blade cutting through the air with deadly precision. I barely managed to block, the force of the strike sending a jarring shock up my arms. Anna darted in from the side, her dagger flashing as she aimed for his ribs. Ian twisted effortlessly, deflecting her strike and slashing at her with brutal speed. She jumped back, narrowly avoiding the blade, but the tip grazed her shoulder, drawing a line of crimson. He spun back to me, his sword descending in a deadly arc. I raised my weapon just in time, the clash of steel echoing through the hall. Sparks flew as our blades locked, his strength forcing me to my knees. Anna rejoined the fight, attacking Ian from behind. She slashed at his back, her dagger cutting through his robe and biting into flesh. Ian grunted in pain but retaliated immediately, spinning with a backhanded strike that sent her stumbling.
"You're untrained,"
Ian growled, his voice filled with contempt.
"Fighting to survive while I fight with purpose."
His blade flashed again, this time catching my side. Pain shot through me as the steel bit deep, warm blood soaking my shirt. I staggered but refused to fall, gripping my sword tighter. The hall was a blur of movement and blood. Ian's strikes were ruthless and precise, each one designed to cripple or kill. Anna and I worked together, attacking in tandem, but his experience showed. He drove me back with a flurry of strikes, then turned on Anna, his blade carving a shallow gash across her thigh. She cried out, but instead of retreating, she lunged, her dagger finding purchase in his arm. Ian roared, pulling the blade free and throwing it aside. Blood streamed from his wounds, but his resolve didn't waver. If anything, it seemed to fuel his fury. Desperation surged within me as Ian forced us further apart. I could see Anna struggling to keep up, her movements slowing as blood dripped from her wounds. "Ian!" I shouted, drawing his attention. He turned, his cold eyes locking onto mine. I charged, my blade aiming for his chest. He parried easily, but I pressed forward, each strike more ferocious than the last. Anna seized the moment, grabbing a fallen spear and driving it into Ian's side. He bellowed in pain, stumbling as blood poured from the wound. Ian, weakened but unrelenting, lashed out one last time, his blade slashing across Anna's chest. She fell to the ground, gasping, her hands clutching the wound as blood seeped through her fingers. "No!" I roared, the world narrowing to just Ian and me. With a surge of rage and desperation, I drove my sword forward, plunging it deep into his chest. Ian's eyes widened in shock as he staggered back, his grip on his weapon faltering. He dropped to his knees, blood spilling from his mouth as he stared at me with a mix of defiance and acceptance.
"The light, it will return,"
he whispered, his voice barely audible. With a final breath, Ian collapsed, his body lifeless. I dropped my sword and rushed to Anna's side. She lay on the bloodied floor, her breathing shallow, her face pale. "Stay with me," I begged, tears streaming down my face. She smiled weakly, her trembling hand brushing against mine. Her lips parted, her voice barely a whisper.
Congratulations. You're the chosen one.
I felt a hollow ache in my chest, and my throat tightened as I forced a bitter smile. "Please, Anna," I said, my voice cracking, "stay with me. Don't go." Her eyes, clouded with pain but still filled with a flicker of warmth, met mine.
Take care of my younger brother.
She said softly, her words fragile, as if they might shatter in the air. Her hand went still, her breath fading into silence. I held her close, her lifeless body cradled in my arms as grief tore through me, raw and unrelenting. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and I stepped into the stillness of the night. The blood of the fallen clung to my clothes, sticky and cold against my skin. In my hand, I clutched Anna's ID, her face staring back at me through the smudged plastic, a cruel reminder of the life stolen from her. The lion mask dangled from my fingers, its hollow eyes reflecting the faint glow of the elevator lights. The weight of the sword at my side felt heavier than ever, like a leaden anchor pulling me down into the abyss. The cool night air greeted me as I stepped onto the cracked pavement outside the building. I expected to see the first rays of dawn, some glimmer of hope after all the sacrifices, but there was nothing. The darkness was absolute, an endless void that swallowed the world whole. It was like the light had been erased from existence. I stood there, staring into the void, my chest heaving as the weight of it all crashed down on me. And then I laughed. It started as a quiet chuckle, bubbling up from deep within until it grew louder, uncontrollable, echoing off the lifeless streets. "All for nothing," I shouted, the laughter turning into a bitter roar. "All those sacrifices, all that bloodshed, for this?" I threw the mask on, pressing it hard against my face, the cold material biting into my skin. "The light will return," I said mockingly, my voice shaking with hysteria. "Souls for nothing. May the Lord accept our sacrifices," I screamed into the empty streets, my voice breaking. My laughter spiraled into madness as I stood alone in the suffocating dark, my breath fogging the inside of the mask. The laughter died in my throat as I heard the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing through the stillness. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest as a figure emerged from the shadows. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen, cloaked in an otherworldly glow that barely pierced the oppressive darkness. The figure stopped a few steps away, its face hidden beneath a hood. When it spoke, its voice was deep, resonant, carrying a weight that made my knees weak. "I am the fourth angel," it said, the words sending a chill down my spine. "The one who sounded the trumpet that darkened the heavens." I stared, unable to move, my hand gripping the hilt of the sword like a lifeline. "Why are you here?" I managed to whisper, my voice trembling. The angel stepped closer, its presence both terrifying and mesmerizing. "You stand as the final soul," it said. 99 have fallen. For the light to return, the final sacrifice must be made." My grip tightened on the sword, the weight of its blade dragging me deeper into despair. "You want me to kill myself," I said, the words hollow and bitter. The angel nodded, its glowing form unwavering. "It is the will of the divine. Through your sacrifice, the light may return, and the darkness will be banished." I clenched my jaw, my thoughts racing. I saw Anna's face in my mind, her final plea still ringing in my ears. I saw Lily, her laughter like sunlight in a world now consumed by shadow. "No," I said firmly, my voice trembling. "I won't do it. There has to be another way." The angel tilted its head, its voice calm but unyielding. "There is no other way. The darkness that envelops the world is the result of humanity's hubris, their rejection of the divine. These sacrifices are the only means to restore balance." "And what about us?" I snapped, my voice breaking. "The ones who've bled, who've suffered. Are we just pawns in some divine game?" "You are chosen," the angel said. "Each soul was marked to fulfill a sacred purpose. Through their sacrifices, the light draws nearer. But only through your final act will the veil of darkness lift." I laughed bitterly, tears stinging my eyes. "Chosen? You speak of purpose and salvation, but all I see is death." I gestured wildly to the darkened city. "We gave everything, and still the world remains in shadow." The angel's glow flickered slightly, its voice softening. "Your doubt is natural, but the truth remains. Without your sacrifice, the light will never return. You carry the weight of the world's redemption." I turned away, the sword heavy in my grip. My mind was a storm of conflicting thoughts. How could this be the answer? How could my death be the key to salvation? The angel's voice came again, softer this time. "You think of her, don't you? Your daughter." I froze, my breath catching in my throat. "Lily," it said, the name like a dagger in my heart. "She is the light that still flickers within you. This sacrifice is for her, for all the children yet untouched by the darkness. Through your death, they may know the warmth of the sun again." My legs felt weak, my grip on the sword faltering. "She's all I have," I whispered, crying, my voice cracking. "If I do this, she'll never know why. She'll grow up in a world without me." "She will grow up in a world bathed in light," the angel replied. "Your sacrifice will be her salvation. Your name will be a whisper on the wind, a shadow in the past, but she will thrive." I fell to my knees, tears streaming down my face as the weight of the moment crushed me. "And if I don't?" I asked, my voice barely audible. The angel's tone turned grave. "Then the darkness will consume all. Lily, like the rest, will be lost. This is the only way." I closed my eyes, Anna's voice echoing in my mind. "You're the chosen one." With trembling hands, I raised the sword, the cold steel biting into my palms. My breaths came in shallow gasps, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. "For you, Lily," I whispered, tears falling freely. I steadied the blade against my chest, my grip tightening as the weight of my choice bore down on me. "May the Lord accept my sacrifice," I said, my voice breaking. With a final shuddering breath, I drove the sword forward, the sharp edge piercing through my chest. Pain erupted, sharp and blinding, as the world around me dimmed. As I fell, I caught a glimpse of the horizon. For a fleeting moment, a faint shimmer of light broke through the oppressive darkness, illuminating the edges of the world. But just as quickly as it appeared, it faltered. The darkness crept back, swallowing everything in its path. The last thing I saw before my vision faded entirely was the faint glimmer of hope on the horizon. Before all was dark again,